All right, so we're here to discuss the TED Talk that we just saw. It was from a Swedish man. What was his name?
Hans Rosling.
Hans Rosling.
Mm-hmm.
He was talking about various types of poverty, or a new perspective on poverty, or something like that. What he did was he said that the UN had just released access to a lot of their information, and they just and so he used a sort of graphing software to graph out the type of information that he was pulling off of the UN website, I think, or something like that. And the two main pieces of data that he was showing us was the GDP of different countries over the years, over the last 150 years, and the rate of infant mortality. So basically the basic health of infants. And one of the cool things that we were seeing, he had the different countries that were the different colored dots, and they were moving as the years went by. And one of the interesting correlations that one of the interesting things that he showed us is that having a lot of money doesn't necessarily mean that your country's going to have better health, because a lot of times some of the richer nations, like Sweden or the U.S., that were ahead in the money. So they were on the right of the graph in terms of the GDP, but they were still had the same amount of infant mortality as some of the other nations as the graph went on.
Yeah, I really liked also how the CO2 emissions may have correlated with that just a little bit. You know, as they got more money, they were expending more of that, and so that could have an effect on the environment, which would then, kind of have an effect on your health.
And I think it's sad that you have to have, like, the CO2 emissions correlate, like, the parallel with the expenditure with healthcare. And so as you're trying to, get rid of, like, make healthcare better, make everybody healthy, you're killing them at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's like I don't know how that works.
And you would think that with the more money, they'd come up with more, environmentally friendly alternatives for certain things, and that it would go down. But it's not. It's the opposite. It goes up.
You could see some interesting results from, like, China or India, how they used to be really, really, really poor, and then just how you could see it in the CO2 graph and in the other graph how they advanced economically. But you're right, has the same as the carbon. Was it carbon monoxide?
Carbon dioxide.
As the carbon dioxide thing went up, so did the money, the GDP. So.
I just thought it was cool how it showed, like, from the years, like, going on, like, to, like, he showed to, like, 2050 or something like that, like, how the years that they have, like, the potential to develop and, like, grow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I really liked how they showed the pictures of the different stages, like the different money, and how the kitchens compared and the bedrooms compared and the sofas compared kind of thing. And I just liked it how, it is possible for them. They just have to be given the resources they need, don't just give the man the fish, teach him to fish, so then he can feed himself for the rest of his life.
Mm-hmm. An interesting thing about that, how you said I showed it going into 2050, that was like an estimation based upon if the rate of growth stays the same. That it could be a lot more than that or a lot less than that, so we really have no idea what it's going to be like in the future.
I thought it was interesting too, where he'd take a couple of countries and he would compare them. He'd be like, this, like, the U.S. was at the same level as this person in 1970 as this country is in 2001. And so he would do that. He would compare that, as well as he would compare countries side by side as they would, as the years progress, and see how they would relate to each other. I thought that was interesting how he would do that. Oh, and then when he put his family history in there too, when he's like, this is my great grandmother, this is my great grandmother, this is my grandmother, this is me, and like he correlates it. He's like, he makes it personal, to where you can relate more, and it's not just numbers on a graph or circles on a graph.
Yeah, they represent real people.
Kind of made me want to do that with my genealogy, see where my great grandmother and grandmother were. Interesting thought. And so how do you guys think his main thing, his main spiel was that like the impossible is really possible. How do you think that applies to what he was showing us? I'm not sure I really understood the connection to what he was showing us.
I think his whole thing, this is just my take on it, is like his whole thing was to show how, because of economic growth, people are going out of poverty. Yet still people are still in poverty, but it's progressing to the point where, 10 years, 50 years, they'll be where where we're at, like 20, 30 years ago. And they'll progress that way. So they'll gradually get out of poverty that way.
So like eventually Africa could catch up, could get out of debt. It's a hopeful message. That's good.
Yeah.
How many of your guys' countries are in Africa?
Mine.
Oh, that's right. Yours is South America.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah. One thing I know that my country can improve on is the rate of AIDS and HIV, because they, I think, are the highest. And so that could definitely have some improvement. I mean, that's really health care and other kind of things, I mean, economic growth and stuff like that. So that's one thing I hope my country can improve on throughout the progression out of poverty.
I think one big thing also he stressed was like education. Is money's not going to do squat unless you have the education to back it up. We're not going to go anywhere. So regardless of what country we are, how powerful we are.
Because education is what changes things long term over the course of multiple generations. Because if you just give them food or resources or something, that'll solve it for one generation, not their kids or their.
I guess that goes along with the culture, keeping that thriving. And then, it's passed on. The things you learn, you teach to your children. And then they teach it to their children.
So that's why culture is one of his two most important goals, right? Is culture and
I don't remember the other one.
Economic growth.
It was, I think,
Human rights or something.
Human rights.
Human rights.
Right.
Yeah.
human rights and culture, because those are
Yeah.
the two things that you could pass on to your children. Really.
I think it's kind of crazy how they correlate too. Because you have the culture, and it's like you have your values, you have your traditions, but at the same time you have human rights, where you learn to express yourself, you learn to grow and expand and globalize in that way. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Am I right?
I kind
I
of
don't know.
I agree.
Okay. So.
All right. Any other comments?
You good? Okay.
Thanks so much.